entry-level UFO class, and we're going to be exploring some of the different questions that come up for people who are interested in UFO skywatching, the different types of equipment that people use, some of the different experiences that people have, some of the different insights that occur in the process, maybe some of the unexpected dimensions of those experiences. We'll do some Q&A, sort of an opportunity just for a survey. I bring a lot of experience to the field. I'm someone who had long-term interest in the subject. I was reading intensively on it as a child, and eventually went off and had my own experiences. I'm from the Pacific Northwest in British Columbia, in Canada, and so British Columbia is marketed as Supernatural British Columbia by the Tourism Board. And it's, of course, a pun. The area has lots of its own UFOs, lots of Sasquatches, lots of lore, and lots of wilderness. You know, British Columbia is vast and uninhabitable for the most part. Concentrations of people that live in areas like these valleys, mountain valleys, and so on in the interior. The rest of it is wilderness country and all kinds of wildlife living out there, and all kinds of mystery. There's certainly a staunch Victorian society up there that is British Columbia, after all, and so the outlooks, in some ways, are very 19th century on questions related to mystery or anything outside of the canon of our mainstream culture up there. But the inhabitants do have their own experiences. UFO falls into this category of things that our society tells us aren't real, that we can validate for ourselves. And we find ourselves in this quandary, so to speak, this ironic situation where we can even use tools provided by our society to enhance our experience, but in a cultural way we have a gap between what we're experiencing individually and our mainstream culture. The mainstream culture denies that this is happening. So we have a cultural gap, a social gap, a political gap. And how are people to find their way in a society where these chasms are state implemented? The individual isn't going to be able to overcome that themselves, and yet we can glean personal insight of meaning, and we can have shared experiences with others in communities that collect around these issues, either in our hometowns or regional or national. We're here at the ESETI Ranch today, a place where people come in part because they're feeling of connectedness to the UFO issue, contact-related issues. They may be bringing their own experiences from their hometown, or they may be coming here seeking a chance, maybe a first-time opportunity to see something. And so this is the social setting, the cultural and political setting in which this is happening. Jim Stike is a fellow in New Mexico who pioneered grassroots night vision video making, and I went to New Mexico in 2010 and interviewed him with his rig and talked to him about shooting, and went to his site and saw a UFO over his backyard and had a bunch of different experiences with him out in the desert. And one of his comments regarding night vision skywatching was that the instruments enabled the average person to bypass the government rhetoric, the rhetoric related to what may or may not be happening in space. We find ourselves as individuals not unlike the pre-Renaissance people of Europe who relied on the church to tell them what was happening in heaven. What news from heaven? You would have asked the church leaders. And they had held a monopoly on that information, so when folks like Galileo began to penetrate, Copernicus, others began to penetrate that monopoly of information with different types of insight, the challenged political status quo. Some of those people ended up incarcerated. There was very slow progress until further down the line there was an intellectual revolution of sorts. So the early observers who tried to penetrate the veil of mystery surrounding what was happening in space faced different types of challenges, as the folks today who come forward with various claims about contact with UFOs and extraterrestrials. They face social challenges as well, although we're not burning people at the stake per se. We do have a rabid witch hunting culture in which we find magazines, even contemporary magazines like Newsweek, are writing articles about conspiracy theories and how dangerous they are. So UFO, in the conspiracy theory realm, fits under, we find that discussion in the place of discussions about what the governments may or may not be doing in this realm. what materials, information, etc. they may or may not have sequestered away. All of this is designated as UFO conspiracy theory. Whereas the individual experiencer who comes forth and states that, you know, I'm out on my back deck and I'm having these observations and I'm recording them and I've been doing this for years, that's not really in the milieu of the UFO conspiracy theory. If we use Wikipedia as the standard, UFO conspiracy theory in our society pertains directly to people lobbying governments in attempts to get them to release their secret archives, which are deemed to contain all kinds of UFO and ET information. It's not so far-fetched to think about this question in light of the fact that consumers can acquire different types of equipment that are usable in making observations of distant objects and unusual objects. People can buy equipment and just operate it and see for themselves. So if we imagine government budgets running surveillance intensive programs in cities, for example, that it won't only have downward pointing cameras on streets, they're going to have upwards points of observation as well and see what's happening in the sky. And because of that data collection network, it can be assumed that it's reasonable that a certain percentage of what they're collecting is anomalous. And so just based on the notion that we live in a surveillance-intensive society, cities like London, for example, which are heavily cameraed for street observation, we can anticipate that there's also skyward-facing cameras, and that because of the intensity of those networks using equipment not unrelated to what the civilian skywatchers are using, that they're making and collecting their own data as well, and it's simply sequestered away from us. According to Wikipedia, that's the UFO conspiracy theory. I think it's logical to assume, especially once we start to use some of the equipment ourselves and we see how often things happen, it's logical to assume that there's vast volumes of data. So where do we stand on the UFO disclosure model? You know, are we going to spend our time lobbying governments and hope that one day someone will listen to us and someone will pass a vote and a new law will be put in place, or old laws will be undone by some panel somewhere? Are we going to invest our time waiting for that to happen? I mean, do we believe in that process? Do we have enough time in our lives to wait for that to happen? I mean, it may or may not happen. We've seen good people come forward asking for disclosure in the last 15 years. There have been numerous meetings in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club. Many decorated individuals have spoken their truth, and yet we find there's not really any major change in law policy related to disclosure. And so people will continue to petition governments to disclose what they know, with the understanding that there's huge amounts of public money that was invested in the infrastructure they used to collect all the data. Or people will assume some responsibility themselves and say, you know, dang it, whether or not the government comes forward or not, I'm going to break the threshold of knowledge myself. I'm going to be a mini Copernicus or a mini Galileo, mini Newton, and do my own thing. And at least I will penetrate this mystery to satisfy my own questions, and I will hopefully find a like-minded community that will help me to make sense of what I'm seeing and observing. My interest as a observer is less to do with penetrating into government mysteries per se. I can be aware that they exist, but it is not my goal or stated mission to try to breach the security perimeters around any of these things. It doesn't seem that will bring me any closer to any understanding, and it also seems to me that it would endanger my ability to continue engaging in those kinds of activities. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So we see, in other words, things that are in our popular culture that are done in the name of disclosure, particularly on reality television, which is drama, soap opera television. But people will go to locations like Area 51, and then they will breach the perimeter, and then they will be arrested at gunpoint, and then they'll create a drama. And this is supposed to be UFO investigating, but it's this is very misleading. And so I say that I would like to go to locations that are as far away as possible from any high security location. I don't need to bring that to the table to enjoy or participate in these things. I would seek out locations for the remoteness, for the absence of conventional aircraft, so I don't mistakenly engage with a pointer or something like that, as well as I don't have a lot of other things to look at. I'm looking for anomalous stuff. Just find a quiet place where that can happen, and not be, how to say it, not be seduced by the glamour of all this danger in military, which is pervasive. But I'm interested in something that's safe and that has continuity rather than something that comes to an end.